Welcome to the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast. I'm Jeremiah Regan.
And I'm Juan, and we are back with the story of David. Actually, it's the David story, Shepherd, Father, King. We're on to lecture number 7 today, the consequences of David's sin.
We were talking before we started recording, Juan, and you mentioned 7 is hard to listen to. There's a lot of darkness and a lot of problems in lecture 7.
Yeah, I have down in my notes, ugly, ugly, ugly. This is a really tough lecture to listen to because it's a really dark age in David's life. You know, we just finished lecture 6 with the death of his child, and then this one starts with a horrible scene of sexual abuse from a brother to a sister, which is unimaginable and as depraved, I think, as you can get. It's just so hard to put oneself to read it and to understand really what was going on and the reactions of everybody.
And there's a degree of foreignness. I mean, David had multiple children with multiple wives and concubines, as the text reveals later. So on that count, it's a little bit hard to put our heads around it. But on the basic level, if this is a brother raping his sister and then disgracing her, which she says was even the worst part of the exchange, and David apparently takes no action.
And that's, again, part of the thing that's so difficult to understand in this whole lecture that you'll get to hear is that, yeah, David's in action at all the horrible things. And even then, you know, Absalom, the other brother, is enraged with Amnon, who abused Tamar, and he wants justice, which is completely understandable, and we can identify with his call for justice. And David is sort of maybe paralyzed by guilt.
And let's do a quick recounting of the events here and look at the action that David takes. Amnon rapes Tamar. David does nothing. Absalom murders Amnon. David does nothing. And in each of these stages, which take place over the course of several years, it's 2 years between the rape by Amnon and the murder of Amnon by Absalom, and David does nothing. And Absalom flees for 3 years before Joab convinces David to let him come back to the court. Absalom comes back to the court, and David doesn't even see him for 2 more years. So this is a 7-year saga that we're encountering. And other than David giving Absalom a kiss, which Professor Jackson says is a sign of the king giving a signal of redemption, nothing else happens. David does nothing else.
I like that you brought up the timeline because it does help you see how long it goes on for. And you have to think, right, is David failing as both a king and a father in his duties there? Because, I don't know, it seems to me that if I were a subject of that king and I see that the king is not enforcing justice, either as a king or as a father, I would have questions, I think.
Right. And it takes us back to the very first lecture where God, through Samuel, warns the Israelites about what a king will do. And one of the primary elements of that warning was that the king is a man, and a man is sinful. A man has loyalties outside of his kingdom. He has loyalties to his family, and this seems to be part of the tension that David is caught up in. And he neglects his duties as a king, his duty to enforce justice. He's also remiss in his duty as a father. Think about this outrageous instance in which Absalom goes to the roof. This is 2 Samuel 16:22. And they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he came to bed with his father's concubines before the eyes of all Israel. And Professor Jackson points out that's the same roof from which David beheld Bathsheba. As a father, much less as a king, David should have said, "Son, don't do this. This will be bad for you. It's sin before the eyes of God, and it's going to go poorly for you." And David doesn't do that.
Yeah, and so I guess a question we should all ask ourselves is, yes, our sin has consequences. How much should we, or at least let's look at David and, you know, see how the consequences play out. But also I think we need to think of not being overrun by the guilt. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
I think you're right. We saw in the last lecture that David resumed his duties as king after his infant son died. He put the time for mourning behind him, but in lecture 7, we see maybe he didn't quite do that, yet we know that he will. So lecture 7 is hard. It's tough topics. It casts David in the worst light we see him probably in the entire chronicle of his life. But it points to an ultimate redemption in his story in Lecture 8, which we'll talk about later. If you're enjoying these courses, I encourage you to go to hillsdale.edu/course. That's hillsdale.edu/course, and browse through our library of course DVDs. The majority of our online courses are also available for you in DVD format. You can own a physical copy, watch it at any time that you like. These DVDs are available with a donation of $100 or more to Hillsdale College.
So now let's turn to Dr. Jackson in Lecture 7 of the David story, The Consequences of David's Sin.
In our last lecture, we saw the ramification of David's choices of murdering Uriah and sleeping with Bathsheba, the death of the infant child of David and Bathsheba, and the way in which David had to weep, pray to God, fast, that his child not die. He says those famous words, "Who knows?" This is why he was fasting. Who knows? Maybe the child will yet live if I can petition God. And it doesn't come to pass. In today's lecture, we'll be looking at the continuation of the disaster that has befallen David, even in his own condemnation of his deeds when Nathan comes to him. Remember, David says to the parable, the man who's taken the other man's ewe, he says, I would exact upon him a judgment that would require him to pay fourfold. And this is precisely what we're going to see today, is the rest of the fourfold payment coming to fruition with David and his family. And it will remind us that there isn't anything that we do in this world that doesn't have a ripple effect, that it doesn't in some way, shape, or form go on to another and invade their world. And it turns out that their world oftentimes happens to be our own world. In short, what David is about to witness happening to his children, he knows that he bears some, if not all, responsibility for this. And what you're going to find is the struggle of a king and a father who in some way, shape, or form has to find some mode of justice to try to respond to the disaster which he knows he's brought on himself. Chapter 13. And it happened thereafter, Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Amnon, David's son, loved her. And Amnon was so distressed that he fell sick over Tamar, his sister. For she was a virgin, and it seemed beyond Amnon to do anything to her. And Amnon had a companion named Jonadab, son of Shimea, brother of David. And Jonadab was a very wise man. And he said to him, Why are you so poorly, prince? Morning after morning, will you not tell me? And Amnon said to him, Tamar, the sister of Absalom, my brother, do I love. And Jonadab said to him, Lie in your bed and play sick. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, Let Tamar, my sister, pray, come and nourish me with food and prepare the nourishment before my eyes, so that I may see and eat from her hand. And Amnon lay down and played sick. And the king came to see him. And Amnon said to the king, Let Tamar, my sister, pray, come and shape a couple of heart-shaped dumplings before my eyes, that I may take nourishment from her hand. And David sent to Tamar at home, saying, Go pray to the house of Amnon, your brother, and prepare nourishment for him. I'll stop here. I hope you can see what's coming at David, the way in which he's being implicated here. Remember, when David wanted to take Bathsheba into his home and to sleep with her, when he wanted Uriah killed, what did he do? He found messengers. He found intermediaries to go and do his work for him, to be that messenger, to be that go-between. What's David's role here? It's really brutal. David is the one who must send Tamar to Amnon. This is David's role, this implication. So implicated because it was he himself who proclaimed a fourfold vengeance upon himself unknowingly. And now what? Now he's being sent to go and send Tamar to her brother, where she'll be raped. A couple other details really ought to jump out at us here. The first thing is the dumplings. They are heart-shaped. This is that heart imagery that we've seen throughout this entire narrative. And not only that, but look at the detail here. That it says that I may take nourishment from her hand. What Amnon is asking for and the details being used here, is a replication of the parable of Nathan, the way in which the shepherd would feed the little ewe to give you nourishment from his hand. It's the same details being utilized here that's being set up to trap Tamar in order for Amnon to be able to take advantage of her. There's something really brutal here, obviously for Tamar, but now for David's role in it. So he's implicated for his misdeeds previously, but now he's being explicitly implicated here as the go-between. And Tamar went to the house of Amnon, her brother, he lying down, and she took the dough and kneaded it and shaped it into hearts before his eyes and cooked the dumplings. And she took the pan and set it before him, and he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Clear out everyone around me," and everyone around him cleared out. And Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the nourishment into the inner chamber, that I may take nourishment from your hand." And Tamar took the dumplings that she had made and brought them to Amnon, her brother, within the chamber. And she offered him to eat, and he seized her and said to her, "Come lie with me, my sister." And she said to him, "Don't, my brother, don't abuse me, for it should not be done thus in Israel. Don't do this scurrilous thing, and where would I carry my shame? And you would be like one of the scurrilous fellows in Israel. And so speak, pray to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." And Amnon did not want to heed her voice. And listen how quick this prose happens. He did not want to heed her voice, and he overpowered her, and he abused her, and he bedded her. It's a mark of Hebrew prose. Things will just happen in quick succession to kind of show you the violence and the lack of thought, the lack of feelings or emotion there. And Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, for greater was the hatred with which he hated her than the love with which he had loved her. Those lines there may be some of the finest psychological insights that you're going to see in all of ancient literature. After this moment, when he gets to consummate his lust for Tamar and he rapes her, he abuses her, he overpowers her, the next line is that now this overwhelming lust that he feels for her that is taking control of him, so that he must be close to her, so that he must have physical contact with her, so that he can consummate what he thinks is a love, but is a lust for her. The moment that it's done, he now hates her with more hatred than the love that he had felt for her previously. I think what we see here is obviously his own shame, his own disgust, to see what he's done now to his sister. And for the biblical author to just put it so succinctly, carefully, but extremely succinctly, to hate her with a hatred that's more powerful than the love with which he loved her. And she having done nothing other than being utterly abused. And Amnon said, "Get up, go." Look how quick that language is. And she said to him, "Don't." And this is a stunning line, very hard for us to wrap our heads around, I think. "This wrong is greater than the other you did to me, to send me away now." And he did not want to heed her. And he called his lad, his attendant, and said, "Send this creature, pray, away from me, and bolt the door behind her." And the language there, send this creature away from me. This woman whom he lusted after, he thinks he loved, now he can call her a creature. This linguistic manifestation of the object that he's treated her as here. This hatred that he feels for her, to now call her a creature. And she had an ornamented tunic, the only other mention of ornamented tunic in all of the Hebrew Bible other than Joseph. For the virgin princesses did wear such robes. And his attendant took her outside and bolted the door behind her. And Tamar put ashes on her head, and the ornamented tunic that she had on she tore, and she put her hand on her head and walked away screaming as she went. And Absalom, her brother, said to her, "Has Amnon, your brother, been with you? For now, my sister, hold your peace. He is your brother. Do not take this matter to heart." So here you have 3 mentions of heart in this text. And when he tells her, "Do not take this matter to heart," you know exactly what Absalom's doing. He's taking this matter to heart. And Tamar stayed desolate in the house of Absalom, her brother. And King David, not David her father, not just David, but King David, had heard all these things. And he was greatly incensed. And Absalom did not speak with Amnon either evil or good. For Absalom hated Amnon for having abused Tamar, his sister. And this is really important. He says he did not speak with him. We're going to see David do this same thing with Absalom after Absalom kills Amnon. He did not speak to him. He holds it in. So we see just this horrific scene here, the destruction of Tamar, who runs to her brother Absalom's house. What do we see? King David, and you can imagine, just imagine his horror of this. He's got a child who rapes another child. If you're a father, and a king, what does one do with the justice in all of this? And it may be easy to say, well, it's simple. You just put Amnon to death. But what if you're, again, King David, and whatever has befallen you, you're already feeling that responsibility for it. Even, and not just simply because you were the go-between to send Amnon there in the first place, but because you have brought this destruction on your household. And it happened after 2 years of silence from Absalom, that Absalom had a sheep shearing at Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, "Look, pray, your servant has a sheep shearing. Let the king pray go, and his servants with your servant." And the king said to Absalom, "No, my son, we shall not all of us go, and we shall not burden you." And he pressed him, but he did not want to go. And he bade him farewell. And Absalom said to him, "If not, pray let Amnon my brother go with us." And the king said to him, "Why should he go with you?" And Absalom pressed him. And he sent Amnon with him, together with all the king's sons. So let's just stop there. I think you get the sense that David knows what's up, because he wants to know from Absalom, why should Amnon go? He knows Absalom has been silent these 2 years. He knows their history. Here's where David's being implicated one more time. Absalom has to go to him as the go-between. "Please send my brother." The same way Amnon had to send for David. "Please send my sister." David is completely bound up in this sort of fraternal warfare that we see here. And Absalom charged his lad, saying, "See, pray, when Amnon's heart is married with wine. And I say to you, strike down Amnon, you shall put him to death. Fear not, for is it not I who charge you? Be strong and act as valiant men." And Absalom's lads did as charged, and all the king's sons arose and rode away, each one on his mule, and fled. And as they were on their way, the rumor reached David, saying, "Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them remains." And of course, the reports are brought back to David, and they tell him, "Not all your sons are dead, only Amnon." And of course, Absalom has to flee now, to take off from David. And now you sit there and you think, well, let's just think about the hypotheticals here. What could David have done? Certainly he had to do something with Amnon, the abuse of Tamar. What would that justice look like? But even then, in acting as a king, let's just pretend for a moment we can separate these things, and perhaps we can. To do justice as a king, however Amnon is to be punished, still is not going to ease David the father's mind. Because what David the father knows, and again, notice this is just an artificial separation, is it not? David the king, David the father. It's artificial. This is the same person. But David the father knows. He knows. This destruction has come upon me because what I have done. In fact, he called for this very judgment on him, a fourfold vengeance. He knows he was implicated in as being the go-between for Tamar. So even if he could do justice, even if he did do justice as king, there's something here as father that there is no relief for him. He is bound in this sort of thing. We are told that Absalom had fled, and he was there in Geshur for 3 years. He leaves. He won't come back. And in chapter 14 We're not going to go through the entire chapter, but you get Joab trying to play the role of Nathan the prophet, and a woman comes to David looking for a solution to bring her loved one back. And David sees right through it. Joab, we can say, is no Nathan. He sees what Joab's asking for, to bring Absalom back in chapter 14, verse 21. And the king said to Joab, "Look, pray, I have done this thing. Go and bring back the lad Absalom." And of course, Joab is going to. And it's here in chapter 14, verse 25. This is where we're going to start to see the rise of Absalom. And this, by the way, is the Absalom. This is the fellow man of the prophecy of Nathaniel. This is Absalom. And David doesn't really see it coming.
Whether you've just started teaching or spent decades in the classroom, you know there's always more to learn. But where do you start? Well, here at Hillsdale College, we have the answer for you. Tried and True, a primer on sound pedagogy by Hillsdale College professor Daniel Copeland. In this little book, you'll read lessons from more than 25 years of Dr. Copeland's classroom experience. It's all distilled into 14 easy-to-read chapters on lesson planning, assignments, and classroom management, and it will help you improve your skills and inspire you as a teacher, one of our most important professions. Whether you've been in front of the classroom for years or this is your first year, when you read Tried and True, you'll find something to help you keep improving every single day. You don't need to go at it alone. Let Dr. Copeland's real-world experience encourage you and inspire you. You can get your copy today at hillsdale.edu/true. That's hillsdale.edu/TRUE. Thanks for listening.
And there was no man so highly praised for beauty as Absalom in all Israel. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut his hair from 1 year till the end, he would cut it. As it grew heavy upon him, he would weigh the hair of his head, 200 shekels by the royal weight. This is just a great detail that the authors went to sit there and tell us precisely how much Absalom's hair weighs, just to highlight his beauty. 200 shekels, it's going to be about 5 pounds worth of hair in a year. So this is a really beautiful man. And 3 sons were born to Absalom. And I love this detail. And a daughter named Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. Absalom lived in Jerusalem 2 years, but the king's face he did not see. And Absalom sent to Joab in order to send him to the king, but he did not want to come to him. And he sent still a second time, but he did not want to come. And he said to his servants, "See Joab's field next to mine, in which he has barley. Go set it on fire." And Absalom's servants set fire to the field. And Joab rose and came to Absalom's house and said to him, "Why did your servant set fire to the field that belongs to me?" Let's just stop here for a moment. In these lectures, we haven't really focused on Joab. Joab is an extremely treacherous character. If there's one rule in all of 1st and 2nd Samuel, the rule is really simple. Do not cross Joab in any way, shape, or form. He will kill you. If you are in any way a rival or a threat to Joab, he will kill you. So you look at what Absalom does. Absalom is a man who really has no fear, or perhaps he's desperate, gone for 3 years, in the city for 2 years, and David won't even speak to him? A son who's killed another. Resolve something, anything. Tell him he's forgiven, punish him, take away land, do something, anything. Instead, David completely ignores him. It's no political strategy to ignore Absalom. And it's certainly no parental strategy. There's been a wrong done here. No matter how much David is implicated in the wrong, something needs to be done. Absalom pushed so far as to burn down Joab's fields. Those are fields you don't want to burn down. And Absalom does it nonetheless. An act really of desperation. He says, "It would be better for me were I still there." Now, And now let me see the face of the king, and if there be guilt in me, let him put me to death. Absalom wants justice. He doesn't care which way the justice goes. Give me justice. And this should make sense to us, because when his sister was raped, where was the justice? Nothing was done. Absalom took it into his own hands. And this is going to be an important detail here, this idea of wanting justice. Absalom saying, if he wants to put me to death, that's fine. Let's just have some sort of resolution here. And of course, for David, putting his own son to death, that's no resolution. How can that be a resolution since you're kind of implicated in what he's done? This is what I mean. David as either king or father or both. He's just ensnared in all of this. And Joab came to the king and told him, and he called to Absalom. And he came to the king and bowed down to him, his face to the ground before the king. And this is the detail. And the king kissed Absalom. And just notice what's going on here. The king kissed Absalom, not David, his father, not even David, not even King David, not King David, his father. This very impersonal, the king kissed him. This is the royal kiss. This is fine, you're off the hook. But this is not the justice that Absalom's looking for. There's nothing here. And you can see how this is going to bear political fruit. Chapter 15, verse 1. And it happened thereafter that Absalom made himself a chariot with horses and 50 men running before him. And Absalom would rise early in the morning and stand by the gate of the road. This is the most important place in the city. And so to every man who had a suit to appear in judgment before the king, Absalom would call and say, from what town are you? And he would say, from one of the tribes of Israel is your servant. Absalom would say to him, see, your words are good and right, but you have no one to listen to you from the king. And Absalom would say, would that I were made judge in the land. And to me, every man would come who had a suit in justice, and I would declare in his favor. Notice what that line is. To every man I would do this. But to every man who has suit, because of course every man's going to have a suit against every man. But Absalom doesn't care. He realizes that there is something ineffectual, at least in the way in which people see David. And we have to go back a long way. Remember how resolute David had been, scrapper David, in the hills David, avoiding Saul David, playing mad David. And now what do you see? A David who does nothing. He gives his son a kiss, and that's it. Absalom taps into this. And now what's Absalom's call to the people? I will bring justice. And this is going to be the seeds of revolt. Absalom saying, I would bring justice. And so when a man would draw near to bow down to him, he would reach out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. And Absalom would act in this fashion to all the Israelites who appeared in judgment before the king. And Absalom, here's your detail, stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And there's your heart imagery one more time. I hope you can see after, these 6 lectures, you can see, I think heart has come up in every single one of them. It plays such a major role, and it's supposed to help connect us. It's what kind of ties the whole narrative together for us. And at the end of 4 years, chapter 11, you have the call going out. Absalom has become king in Hebron, and Absalom with 200 men went from Jerusalem, invited guests going in all innocence, and they knew nothing. They are now overthrowing David. It says they report to David, the hearts of the men of Israel are following Absalom. And David said to all of his servants who were with him in Jerusalem, rise and let us flee, or none of us will escape Absalom. Hurry, let us go, lest he overtake us and bring down harm upon us and strike the town with the edge of the sword. And so now David is one more time having to run. It's going to be David the scrapper again. He's lost his kingdom to his son. He's lost his kingdom to his fellow man, it turns out, which is precisely the point. This is the prophecy coming to fruition. There's a beautiful moment, at least I think it's a beautiful moment. There is somewhat of a turning point here at least for me, with David's consciousness as to what has gone on. It's in chapter 16, and it's a very brief scene. It is a curse by Shimei, son of Gera. He comes to David. It's chapter 16, verse 6. He hurled stones at David and at all King David's servants, and all the troops and all the warriors were at his right and at his left. And thus Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless fellow. The Lord has brought back upon you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you became king, and the Lord has given the kingship into the hand of Absalom your son. And here you are because of your evil, for you are a man of blood. And Abishai said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me pray, cross over and take off his head. And the king said, what do I have to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah? If he curses, it is because the Lord has said to him, curse David. And who can say, why have you done this? And David said to Abishai and to all his servants, look, my son, the issue of my loins, seeks my life. How much more so then, this Benjaminite? Leave him be and let him curse, for the Lord has told him. Perhaps the Lord will see my affliction, and the Lord may requite me good for his cursing this day. Look at this. This is immediately after Absalom has taken over the kingdom, has stolen everyone's hearts. And what's David willing to say? Let this man curse me. He may be right as he's calling David a man of blood. And in some ways, it's not he may be right. It turns out he is in fact right. In general, that David's a man of blood. In fact, this is precisely why David won't be able to build the temple. 1 Chronicles 22:8. God says to him, you've spilled so much blood. There's some truth here. And I say this not to indict David, because I don't need to indict David. David indicts himself. What does he say? Let him curse me. Perhaps the Lord put these words in his mouth. This is David's humility coming to light here. The man who thought he could just simply sleep with Bathsheba and kill Uriah and nothing would happen. And then he could write and say, let it not seem evil in your eyes. Now look at what he's saying. That he may be right, and the Lord may have put these words in his mouth. The old David, I would have just had him just lop his head off in a heartbeat. Not this David. This David seems to understand that he just bears responsibility for everything that's going down here. It's not an anger at Absalom. Verse 21, chapter 16. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, advising him, come to bed with your father's concubines, whom he left to watch over the house, and let all Israel hear that you have become repugnant to your father, and the hand of all who are with you will be strengthened. And they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof. By the way, this is the very same roof in which David would have seen Bathsheba. This is where Absalom is pitching his tent. He came to bed with his father's concubines before the eyes of all Israel. And this is precisely Nathan's prophecy to David, that David's fellow man will in fact be his own son. And his own son is going to be this beautiful young man who's stolen all the hearts of Israel. Does this sound familiar? This is precisely what David had done with Saul. Not in a manipulative way. Please don't mishear me there. He didn't come to power the way in which Absalom has come to power. But nevertheless, what do we see happen to David here? His kingdom has gone over to somebody else. The prophecy has come true. David's entire world is come crashing down. He's lost his kingdom. He's lost his beloved son. He's had a son murdered and a daughter raped. He's lost an infant child. All of the world has come crashing down on David's head here. The prophecy has come true, and even more to the point, David's own judgment against himself with that fourfold vengeance has come to pass. And so what we'll look at next time is the defeat of Absalom, the death of Absalom and David's response to it, and the restoration of the kingdom that will ultimately be handed over to Solomon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast. If you want to continue learning about the David story or other topics, please visit hillsdale.edu/course. There, you will find over 40 free online courses including ancient Christianity, the Genesis story, classic children's literature, and many more. The courses include additional readings, study guides, fully produced videos, and you can chat with your fellow students on a dedicated forum. Upon completing a course, you will also get a certificate. All our courses are free because we believe that what you'll learn will enrich your life and that a virtuous citizen is the best defense for liberty. So pursue the education necessary for freedom and happiness at hillsdale.edu/course today. That's hillsdale.edu/course. Thanks for listening.